Hello, welcome to this week's episode of FireDEV. After popular demand to have me back on and just do like a solo podcast, like about 3 weeks ago, I did a solo one that was just about the state of the tech industry and also the gaming industry as well, but more specifically or more abstractly, the tech industry with all the layoffs, everything around that. And that was just me talking. That episode was received very well, so I thought I'll create another one. And this is episode 77 as well. So there's been a lot of episodes that I've been naturally working on, and as a result I've learned a lot about you know doing a podcast, everything that goes with it, things that frankly, no matter how much research I would have done and did do, I would never have learned because I didn't, do it. That thing, you there's more in experience than there is usually in, learning and in education, but preparation is also key, and that's where this episode comes in. So what I've done is I've boiled down to about 15 different things. There might be a few extra more than 15, but 15 things that I recommend that you need to think about and have a good idea. And they're also tips and tricks as well. So the top 15 things that I think you should be considering when starting a podcast. And this doesn't matter whether it's 2024, 2025. This is just, relevant regardless. And I feel like with all the layoffs that are happening and people, having changes in their career, they're gonna be a lot of people that are gonna look to podcasting, TikTok, YouTube, and other avenues, either to build a career or because they've got some time now. And I feel like this will be a good episode for them and anyone else that is looking to start a podcast. So, first of all, I want to say this list is mm, not fully comprehensive because I had to try and reduce it down. You know, if this episode is received well, I might create a part two and part three where there's even more things that I'll recommend that you need to, think about when you are looking to start a podcast. And this is in no particular order. So don't think, oh, the first three are the most important. It is just in general. So number one, upload frequency. And what I mean by that is, are you uploading every day? Probably not the best idea. We'll go into that in a second. So, are you uploading every day, every week, every 2 weeks, every month? You can also do seasons as well. Like, are you going down that route, or is it just a consistent podcast where every X amount of time goes by and there's a new episode? What is that? You know, upload frequency. And the reason this is very important is because anything in, I would say, creation and business in general, and that's what it is. It is kind of a business, even if you're just doing it for fun. It is business, like entrepreneurial. Like, you need to be consistent. So if you say, "Oh, I'm going to upload every week on with FireDEV," it's every week Thursday 5 a.m. GMT. That's always been the case. Always hit that deadline. It's been tight sometimes, but I've always hit that, and that's been very, good for me for building an audience, but also for me to make sure there's episodes out there. There have been times personally where I thought I'm going to release 2 episodes or 3 episodes in a week. I can do it, especially when I've got a fair few episodes banked, and I'll actually talk about that in a second as well. But I've decided against it, and it's been good because it's meant that I've been able to consistently, like I said, every single week, provide a new episode at a particular date and time, and it creates familiarity with your audience. But it also depends on what you're uploading. Like, if you're talking about daily news, for example, then maybe a daily podcast is obviously, better for you. But you might not need to do a long form 2 hour podcast like FireDEV is. Like, I've had up to 4 hour episodes, 3 hour episodes, and they're typically about 2 hours. You might only do 15 to 30 minutes. That's a lot more manageable. So the upload frequency, but then combined with that is also the length as well. So that's actually tip number two, is the length as well. So, how long do you want it to be? So there's multiple things around, you know, you know, the length side of it. And number one is the fact that do you have enough time to allocate 2-3 hours in one go, usually speaking in one go, to doing it, and then to editing it, etc., etc., and then all the problems that come along with failed recordings, for example. Can you contribute that time? So the length is very important. Also, if you go for a shorter, length, let's say 15, 20, 30 minutes, it's a lot more manageable, but there's only so much you can, discuss. Before you know it, the intro, you've introduced the podcast, you probably have 10, 15 minutes left. You need to be very, very to the point. So if it is going to be kind of a relaxed conversation, either what I'm doing now or how I do it with guests, 15, 20 minutes isn't going to cut it. You're probably going to need an 45 minutes to an hour or longer to really get the most out of it. So that's another big one, is how long are you going to be doing it? And I think that kind of links in with the upload frequency. You'll traditionally see episodes that, or podcasts that don't upload as frequent. I mean, there are exceptions, but that don't upload as frequent, like every day, are usually a bit longer, and the ones that are uploading super regularly, sometimes multiple times a day, like they're more snippets. They're like interviews, kind of, almost like the way YouTube has shorts and TikTok has reels, or Instagram has reels. I can't remember which one. I'm forgetting there, but like they have short like formats. It's kind of in the podcasting world as well, but it is still considered a whole episode. So that's tip number 2. Number 3 is your audience, and again, this heavily links in with the length and the upload frequency as well. You'll see quite a lot of them are linked. So the audience, who are you expecting and wanting to listen to your podcast? So I'll take FireDEV, for example. A lot of the people are on the younger side, 30 to 35 or less. So they're either people that are beginning their career, potentially looking to make a change in their career, or they're still at university or in education and they are figuring out what they want to do. Makes sense. FireDEV has a lot of people, it is all people that are in the industry, tech people, artists, CEOs. So they're seeing people's journeys, and that helps them inform their own decisions. Whereas if you're doing a podcast about stocks and shares and the daily news in the stock market, your audience probably isn't going to be 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. You get the odd one, probably be 30, 40, 50-year-old, maybe 60-year-old people. And not just age, you'll also be, depending on the types of stocks you're talking about, you'll potentially be certain geographies that are more interested in it, than others. So, like if you're talking about Western stocks, you're probably going to get people over in the West, or that have interest investing in the West, predominantly that'll be listening to your podcast. And that's, a very important, aspect of it, because that way you can tailor your message and the way you deliver that message as well. Also, like if, let's say, your podcast is in English, like mine is, but it's going to get a lot of views from someone overseas that doesn't natively speak English, maybe from China, for example, for whatever reason, you'll know that better than I will. Let's say if you're talking about anime, and it's a particular anime that's more popular in China, for example, that's fine. But just bear in mind, because of the language difference and the language barriers, you might need to slow down the pace of your speaking, as I have just started doing right now. This is actually very important in general. I recommend that you slow down your pace when talking anyway. It does make for a better listening experience for most people. And the fact that you can actually speed up on most platforms means that even if it's a bit slow for someone, somebody can just put up to 1.25 or 1.5 or even beyond that, speed, and they can still, listen to you. I know you can slow it down, but I feel like people are likely to speed it up if it's a little too slow. Then slow it down, I feel like they'll just turn it off if they're if it's feeling a little too fast for them based on the topic. So yeah, the audience is another one. Like, who are you targeting? And that way you can structure it accordingly. And also that can inform the length of it as well, because if you have a particular audience that generally, uh, you know, or will only probably listen at 15-20 minute intervals, doing 4 hour long podcasts probably isn't the best thing. But if you've got somebody you're targeting that probably would provide 2 hours or more of uninterrupted time, then doing 15-20 minute segments probably isn't the best either. So yeah, look at your audience. Next is to have guests or not to have guests. So this particular episode of FireDEV has no guests. Obviously, it's just me speaking. But most of my episodes, actually all but two, so this one and an episode from 3 weeks ago, has a guest, or potentially more. Like, I've had panels of guests as well on the podcast, and that's very important. What type of podcast are you doing? And again, this actually goes back to the first point of upload frequency, and then also the third point of the audience as well, and kind of the point of length as well, is that if you are having guests, it's gonna be very difficult for you to do a daily podcast where you're pretty much having a new guest every single time. Yes, there are part examples. I mean, Joe Rogan doesn't upload daily. I like multiple, daily traditionally, but he does upload a lot of episodes. But he does not have a shortage of people wanting to come on. Your podcast is not JRE from the start. Obviously, you can aspire to be that, but you got to be realistic. So if you say to yourself, "I'm going to do a bi-weekly podcast, so every 2 weeks, and I'm going to get a new guest on," that's more manageable than having a new guest on every day or twice a day. Like, that's just not practical. And then, where are you getting these guests from? Most of my guests on the FireDEV podcast have come from me connecting with people I do not know via LinkedIn. This is very important. This is also part of this point of guests. It's a numbers game. You've got to reach out. I have a template that I use, and I'll modify for some guests if it's someone that I feel like I can spend a bit more time tweaking the message that I'm, sending them, and it's worth tweaking it. Then I'll tweak it, maybe even create something tailor made for them. But yeah, it is a numbers game. It is a matter of, you contact 1,000 people, you probably get 10 responses. It is crazy, and then out of them, most of them will say no, or it'll be like, maybe, maybe not. Then out of the ones that say yes, they'll won't manifest into something, anything, or they'll have to go through this and this hoop when they're working for a company. That's another thing. It also depends on what you're talking about. What is the topic to talk about. And obviously I haven't talked about topic, but point number 3 that I made, which was about audience, is literally that. It is, so point number 3 is really audience and also topic as well. So like, what you're talking about and who are you targeting. So I just want to make that clear. So topic and audience are very, linked hand in hand. So again, going back to point number 4 that I'm on, which is, guess or no guess, the topic that you are, discussing, that will inform the type of guests you have, how frequent you probably can get new guests on, and also how many hurdles you'll have to go through. FireDEV, it's about people's journeys, what they do for work. So literally, so many people that I connect with, they're under NDAs, and they're scared to come on a podcast and talk because they don't want to get fired. They don't want their jobs to be impacted. I do find generally the higher up I go within the company's hierarchy, so management and executive level, if I can get somebody from that part of the company on the podcast, they're less reluctant, because especially if they've been there for 10-15 years, to the level of trust created with them and the company, they probably just quickly mention it to their line manager or executive above them, and they say okay, or they don't even bother. Like, it's, whereas a junior or a mid guy that's been there for 6 months and been in the industry for only 2 years, they're very, very reluctant about coming on to podcasts. And even when they say yes, about people flake out, and that's a whole nother thing which I'll be going on to very soon. But yeah, so have a template for reaching out. don't go for big guests. I know you're gonna think, oh, I'm doing a tech podcast, or let's say gaming podcast, a video game podcast, and I want John Carmack on there. I want, I mean, the names are escaping me now of people within the video game industry, but like start small, start for every day, or maybe lesser known big guys. Like I've had people on the podcast that have worked on very influential products in the early days of said product. Like I've had Tom Hall from, you know, making Doom and Wolfenstein, but he is the lesser known of the four original id software guys, so it was easy to get him on there. It was great experience for me to have him on there, but it's different to me trying to get John Romero or John Carmack on there. So you be realistic about the type of guests that you can get on there for the level of podcast that you have. Another thing, when you're reaching out to guests, get their emails. One is good to have, build your email list. I mean, it's fantastic to have that. Obviously, you don't want to be bombarded, especially if you're getting people that are within the industry. That could be some, powerhouses and some, really powerful people and good names to be associated with. Don't go crazy and just emailing them about this and that. But get the emails, and then also get their time zones, because obviously when you're working out, you know when to record, having email and time zone, and all you say is, if they're interested, let's say you message them, they say this sounds very interesting. I just literally come back with say, it'd be good to have a quick 10-15 minute call to discuss the podcast and your involvement in it. Just need your email and time zone for a calendar invite. That way, if you're putting it as, okay, I need your email and time zone for a calendar invite, they're more receptive to just giving you their email instead of you just saying, what's your email, what's your phone number. Like, people are less likely, but you can get that information in it, if you go about it the right way. And then combined with that, use a calendar. Don't try and memorize it or note it down. Just use a calendar application. Right now, I'm using Notion Calendar linked with my Google account, and everything goes on there. So I'll put on there if I have a call with someone, not an episode. It's like a 10-15 minute call to discuss the podcast. I'll put on there if I obviously have a podcast, and I'll block out like 2.5 hours of time, because in case we do actually record for 2 hours, but there's 5-10 minute, talking back and forth at the start, then I'll do an outro. I'll do like a little wrap up after the podcast where I talk to them and get some feedback. So it's always good to have a bit more time, blocked in your own calendar. And I also put on there, if let's say I'm reach out to someone on LinkedIn, or it could be any platform, but I mention LinkedIn, and they say, I'm interested, but I'm really busy right now. I've had this a lot. Maybe they got a deadline coming up. Can we touch base in a few months, later in the year, next year even? Like, sometimes it says 12 months later. You're not going to remember that. So if they say, if it's like it's the end of February now when I'm recording, they say, can we touch base in 3 months? So end of March, April, May. So end of May. So late May, early June, I'll put a calendar entry in. It won't involve them if I have the email. It will literally be a notification for me that pops up saying, catch up with this person, like dash LinkedIn, just so I know that he was LinkedIn. I can search for that person, get the messages up, and I can just, message them and basically, catch up with them. So that really helps. That's where I would use the calendars applications for. The fifth point is flexibility. And what I mean by this is, you might have an idea of what your podcast is going to be, what your audience is going to be, what the topic's going to be, the format's going to be, even the upload frequency, but be prepared that that might change. And it might be because you see what is working and what isn't working. You adapt what you feel like you enjoy and you don't enjoy, and you tweak and modify it. That is fine. There's so many podcasts out there that if you look at what their original episodes were, they're pretty or drastically different to what they are now. Like one that comes to mind by Stephen Bartlett, the British entrepreneur, The Diary of a CEO. I remember listening to his original episodes, and it's literally what the name suggests. It does what it says on the tin. it is just the diary of a CEO, aka him, and he's talking about his life, his business, his experiences. And now, frankly, it is just a JRE clone, as is, I feel like, Lex Friedman's podcast. And don't get me wrong, they're doing well and they're approaching it from their own kind of, mindset. But it is just like, we're gonna get a guest on. It's pretty much always like guests that have come on these other podcasts. It's no longer Diary of a CEO, yet the name is still the same. He does abbreviate it now, so I feel like that kind of abstracts it away. But it's grown into something else. So your podcast might grow into something else. Have that flexibility. You might be recording once a week, and then you might decide, okay, again, you don't want to be doing these sort of switches too often and just all of a sudden. But you might think, this isn't working, or it'd be better every 2 weeks, or instead of doing an hour episode, I'm going to do 2 hour episodes but less frequently. Or instead of doing 2 episodes, I'm going to do 30-minute episodes. I'm going to do them more frequently. Have that flexibility in you, and but then link that with the consistency and the frequency as well. Next is the tools. What tools are you using to record? And that will actually depend on if you are going to go down the route of live and not live. Because if you're not doing it live, you can use literally any tool that you can imagine to record audio. But, and chances are this is probably going to be the case, if you have guests, you're probably going to be talking over the internet. So it'll be best if you get some sort of website. Don't be getting an application where they have to download or install some plugin or extension. Trust me, you don't want that, especially with people that you don't know. It's hard to get people that you've known for 10 years to do something that takes 3 steps, let alone somebody that you've just met probably 2 weeks ago, had a quick 10-15 minute call. So just use a website. I use a website called Zencastr. That's ZENCASTR.com. And they have a free tier and they also have a pay tier. I found when I first started about a year and a half ago, the free tier was more than sufficient. I feel like they removed some of the features and it wasn't as reliable anymore. So I use the paid tier now, but I feel like some of the reliability issues probably have been fixed. But yeah, it just wasn't practical anymore for because how big my podcast had gone in terms of the number of episodes and the length and all that sort of stuff. So I had to get the paid one. So yeah, what tools are you using? You know, and this is dedicated for podcasts. So I would say use something that's dedicated for podcasts. If you're going to do it live, then you probably want some. It depends. Are you doing just YouTube? Are you doing a Spotify? Are you doing a multiple for platforms? Then you probably want like some sort of aggregation tool. And also, if it's not live, how are you uploading it? The tool that I used to upload, it used to be called Anchor, and it was Anchor.fm. I'm sure if you still go to that website, it still takes you to the website, but it is now called Podcasters by Spotify. Spotify own it now. But you can still upload to there, and once you've set it up, you've got all the feeds set up. You'll upload to Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and like 10, 15 other ones. So you're all good, except for YouTube, it will handle. And YouTube, you can just upload manually yourself. So that is something very important, like the recording software as well. Linking in with that, tip number 7 is the tools that you use for editing. So audio editing, video editing, and photo editing. Audio editing is kind of obvious, like why you would want audio editing. You might want to take bits out, especially if it's not live. You might want to improve the audio, the levels, for example. Video editing, if you obviously have a video side, like if it's not just audio, then, and I'll talk about, video and audio only, later, but, you'll want some sort of video editing software like Premiere Pro, for example, or the Final Cut, all those sort of things. And photo editing, less obvious, but you'll want to have some basic photo editing skills, and whether that's you or whether that's a friend or whether that's a co-host possibly, to be able to use something like Photoshop or illustration or Illustrator or any sort of photo editing tool to be able to create thumbnails, and any other relevant artwork. The main one is going to be thumbnails. So there's two main thumbnail formats that you'll need. One is a wide format for a platform like YouTube, and that's like 1280 by 720, so 16 by 9. For podcasting platforms, you'll want one by one, so a square one, and then same thing, create templates. I've got a template for my square one, for my rectangle one. In there, it has a person on there, whoever, for that particular, because I've had about four, 5 different versions of thumbnails. Whoever was the first one for that particular format, they have, their information on there. So you'll be that person's image. You'll be like a little quote or something about that particular episode. It'll be like a background that's usually faded, so it's not as prominent. And then like my branding logo as well. So the tools that you use for editing is also very important. And this is kind of an extension to that. And this is also tools. So tip number 8, using ChatGPT and or other AI tools to enhance the experience. So when I first started FireDEV, I was using no AI tools specifically to enhance the experience. What I use AI tools, and more specifically ChatGPT now, is to help one, create the description of the episode. And I use a custom GPT that I've created. I literally just have to post the the title of the episode in there, and it'll pump out a description of the podcast, and it does an amazing job instead of me typing it. Saves time, and it's a lot better. So use it for something along those lines. And also, it's great for promotion. So when you are promoting, and this will be the next tip, tip number 9, we'll talk about marketing. But when you are promoting, like on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever on your socials, you want to create a post. And if you're naturally not that good at social media, especially for marketing purposes, or you don't have that much experience, using a tool like ChatGPT, you can pump, again, I have a GPT for that as well set up. You can pump out, and I might actually tweak these GPTs and make them a bit more generic and share them with you guys. Let me know if that's something that you'll be interested in. Just, comment or just pop me a message. And this GPT, it will pump out literally. I've set it so you'll pump out a LinkedIn post and a Twitter post. Twitter one is obviously is shorter. LinkedIn is more padded out, and there'll be places where I can insert the different links, and I'll usually insert Spotify, Google, and Apple. Those are the big three. Spotify, I find, is obviously the most successful, like 40-50% of the traffic, like 20 or so percent is from Apple, and the rest is the smaller ones like Google. So tip number 9 that I've kind of already touched on is marketing. And this is very important. You'll want to put it out there. Okay, you might not want to focus too much on it because you want to be consistent with the uploading, with the format, with, just making sure you are, getting episodes out there and you have a consistent style and format. But, start marketing it, Twitter, on LinkedIn. If you already have a presence and maybe you've already done other things online, this is great. If you don't, it's not the end of the world, but be open to learning about different tools like TikTok, possibly making little snippets of the audio or of the video, or for YouTube shorts or for Instagram. Be open to learning about just creating, writing good copy, writing good posts that you can share as well. So marketing is another one, and I think there's a bunch of books and YouTube videos out there that you can learn about marketing as well. The next one is managing and storing recordings. This will be a quick one, but once you've recorded on Zencastr, I'll give you an example. You can download the tracks. Highly recommend you do that. So you'll download all the tracks for each guest. So if there's, for you and your guest, there'll be 2 tracks. You want to edit them together, and you can, take bits out as you need to. If there's you and 3 guests, there'll be 4 tracks then, 1 for you, 1 for each one of the 3 guests. And I store it on external hard drives. I have an online backup as well, and I have the unedited and then I have the edited versions as well. So managing and storing recordings, very important. If you're already a content creator, you probably already thought about this and got some sort of system set up. You can use whatever system you've already got. Next one, tip number 11, make sure you have enough recordings in advance. And when I say record, I mean episodes. So the last thing you want to do is say, okay, I'm going to launch next Tuesday rolls around, you launch an episode, then you don't have another episode recorded for 3 weeks, yet you've promised and you've said that I'm going to do a new episode every week. When I launched FireDEV, I had 5 episodes recorded before I launched. I had them uploaded. I had them recorded, edited, uploaded, had thumbnails done. So the first 5 weeks, I was golden, and those episodes were just there, ready to go. And that really helped. And going forward, I've tried to keep that. There have been times where I haven't had any episodes, and I've been struggling to get a guest on. I've got somebody on, but I'd say have at least 1 to 2 months of episodes banked and ready to go. One, you might go on holiday, you might not be able to record. Two, you might fall ill. A life event like the birth of a child might happen. You might lose your job and you might be focusing more on getting another job. You might fall unwell. There's so many things that can happen that could literally take 1-2 months of your time from recording. And if you don't have episodes ready to go and ideally already uploaded, it can be very stressful and it can be really hit your audience and your podcast. So make sure you have episodes in advance. The next tip number 12, video or audio. And you can do audio only, or you can do video, which will be a combination of video and audio. I don't think I've ever seen a podcast they video only and no audio. That'll be interesting to see if somebody could make a popular one. I think they probably could. There's probably an audience out there. Forget ASMR, it would be like the reverse of that. You would know, be silent podcasts. But yes, so you're doing audio or video. Depending on what you're doing and the type of character you are, you might want to do video if you have a personality that really shines through. And if you've already got a presence online and you're listening to this and your presence is predominantly video, let's say loads of YouTube and loads of TikTok content, then your audience is probably going to be expecting video. But if you don't, or you don't do, video based content, then you can consider audio only. There's huge advantages to audio only. And one of them being it's very relaxed. Like, you don't know what I'm wearing right now. I happen to be wearing a hoodie and tracksuit bottom, but I could be in my boxers. I could be in a three-piece suit. You do not know. You don't know where I'm sitting. I'm in my office. But 2 weeks ago, I had some builders round. They was renovating my bathroom, my ensuite. There was a lot of noise. I just took my laptop with the charger, sat in my Tesla outside, was able to charge it, took the mic, sort of put it in the cup holder, and I don't think you can tell a difference really in that. And I edited the audio afterwards, but I was able to do that. But the thing is, nobody knew where I was sitting because there was no video. Audio only provides that flexibility. Ignoring that side of it, you might not feel comfortable. You've got to figure out what you feel comfortable with. You might want to put yourself out there, but not in video format or not yet. That's fine. Do audio only. The other important thing to note is if you are having guests on, getting guests on is difficult enough. Getting them on and then doing video, you're going to scare a lot of people off. If you say it's audio only and it's not live, they're going to be so much more receptive. So you need to factor in, if you are having guests, you know, be realistic. I think audio only might be a better way to go about it, and because they don't have to get ready. They don't, like, if it's a woman, they don't have to wear makeup. If it's a guy, they don't have to like do their hair, or obviously women do their hair, but like they don't have to be presentable. Physically speaking, you don't know what they look like, and I think that is fantastic. But what I will say is when I do the calls in advance, like a 10-15 minute little call to, you know, check, I guess, touch base, if they put their video on, I put mine on as well. And I think that's a great way of creating a connection. And this is also another thing, that when you do have that initial call before the podcast, when the podcast day comes and you start, it's not awkward, because it's like, hi, I've already met you, so how you doing, how's things been, even though you've only spoke for 10-15 minutes. There's a familiarity there that is unbeaten. Okay, next tip number 13. I'll be quick with this one. Voice levels. Keep it consistent. The amount of times I've listened to a podcast, even big ones, and the voice from one, let's say the host, to the guest, you'll be up and down. You'll be, loud and then quiet. You'll be, really clear and then not clear. It's so distracting. But then also try and keep it consistent between each episode as well. Because like, if I'm listening to a particular podcast, I want to know that, okay, this is the volume level that I can comfortably listen that particular podcast at. There are podcasts that I listen to that I enjoy and I get a lot of value from. Unfortunately, the levels aren't consistent, but because they provide a lot of value in the big podcasts, I ignore the inconsistency in the volume levels, in the quality levels of the record. It's consistent. Like, this is consistently a problem in their episodes, and this is something I try and get on point in my. So keep it consistent, the voice levels. And then tip number 14, and this heavily links in with tip number 13, is the recording equipment that you use. Because if you're going on your phone, that's fine, but then you're using a really expensive £300 or £1,000 mic with your MacBook on another episode. I mean, there may be reasons for you using your phone, and I've had to sometimes as well, but try and keep it consistent. Most of the time I have my MacBook, I have my Blue Yeti microphone, that is it. I'm in the same room. It keeps it very consistent. And then that goes back with the voice levels and the background noise as well. And the final tip, and this is a very important one: expect problems, expect the unexpected. You'll get technical issues. You'll have, like, I've had it where I'm recording an episode and then all of a sudden it's no longer recording. So as a result, I make sure I always have the window open for Zencaster, and the Chrome window open that is on, so I can see if there's a problem that occurs. The last thing, because if it occurs and I spot it within 10 seconds, I can just say to my guest, problem occurred, click stop, we start a new recording. We usually lose 5-10 seconds of recording, so basically we just start that topic or that question that I've asked again. That's not that big of a deal. But last thing you wonder has happened to me: your recording failed after 20 minutes, but you've been talking for another 40 minutes. That's a dud recording. You can't really do anything with that. On top of that, depending on your guest, they may or may not come back. And so you want to make sure any technical issues you can resolve. Sometimes your mic might not be working, so make sure you get on in advance to make sure your mic's working. Next, your guest, they might back out. They might agree, then they back out, whether it's NDA, whether it's time commitments, whether they change their mind, whether they might not like you or listen to some of your episodes. They probably won't tell that to you. I never had that, but that's always a possibility. So guests will back out. Next, guests might request an episode to be pulled down. They'll record, they'll have it uploaded. I've had this where there's like, I've had a junior or a mid tier like developer or an artist, and then they've had some issues with their company. They found out, they haven't liked it. They're like, you haven't gone through the proper approvals. They've requested for the episode to be taken down. I could just be, pig-headed and say, no, I'm not taking it down. I have no legal obligation to take it down, but I'm trying to create a community. I'm also trying to create an environment, a safe environment, where guests can come on and talk about their experiences. Last thing I want to do is put people in that position. So I have taken episodes down. And this actually links with point number, let me see which point it was. Point number 11, having enough episodes banked. Like the 2 or 3 times I've had to take an episode down because I already had episodes recorded, because it was usually within 24 hours. I just, set the next one to, release. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But, expect problems. So that's it. This is my 15 tips of starting a podcast from the last 76 plus, including this one, 77 episodes of doing podcasting. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found value. Let me know if you did, and I'll do a part 2, because there's so many more things I want to, so much more information I want to give you guys about recording, starting and growing a podcast. So thanks for listening to this week's episode of FireDEV. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.